I'm here with Omar Fateh. You know him as the DSA candidate that very famously won the endorsement of the Democratic Farmer Labor Party in Minneapolis. But then what is given is taken away. And he's here on Bad Faith Podcast to explain what dynamic has been unfolding in this progressive race for the mayor of Minneapolis. Welcome to Bad Faith Podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.
All right. So I found myself personally kind of confused when I saw the news both about you winning the DFL endorsement and then what happened afterward, because it was very much framed by the media at the time as being sort of analogous to Zohran Mandani's winning the Democratic Party primary in New York. But the posture was a little bit different than that, right? So can you help us understand what happened and what DFL is and what the relevance of winning that endorsement would have been?
Yeah, absolutely. And the DFL is the Democratic Party. We go by the Democratic Farmer Labor Party. And rather than having a primary process, we have something called the caucus system and the convention. And so at the caucus, there's a night when neighbors come out, which they did by the thousands. They've come to their local ward location, precinct locations. And that's the night in which neighbors are organized to come out to support a candidate. And then based on the number of individuals that come out that night, you get assigned delegates. They vote on who they want to represent each location based off the strength of the candidate. So those delegates go on to the convention and they vote. And so we were able to organize thousands of caucus goers from young people to seniors to people that are fed up with the political process, folks that care about everyday issues like affordability and housing. And we walked away with the most delegates on caucus night. And that really showed at the convention. We walked away, we came in first place on the first ballot with 43%. And then later on, we got over 60% of the delegation to support us and endorse us that night, despite the delay tactics, despite all the obstacles that the Frey campaign tried to hold. Now, after that concluded, there was challenges being made, including a member from the 28-person board who was supporting the mayor. And those 28 insiders, mostly establishment Democrats, including Frey donors and so on, they met privately through the committee and voted to overturn the will of the people, the will of the Minneapolis residents. And this was purely a political decision. It was not one that was based on facts that were presented to the committee or the rules. In fact, we had a former council member who represents one of the PACs that support the mayor say that she's holding on to checks she cannot cash until the endorsement is taken away. And so we see it as what it is, and so do the resident.
Yeah, it's interesting. So the incumbent, James Frey's like pushback has been what? That there were some technical issues with the counting of the votes in the caucus system, and that the majority that you had wasn't legitimate. And it also sort of reflects the fact that the DFL hasn't actually, the caucus hasn't resulted in there being a clear majority for what, like 20 years or so, there hasn't been a DFL endorsement. I mean, what do you make of that? I mean, obviously, we're politically aligned, and I think that all of the left is rooting for you. But is there some truth to the idea that this was a kind of a technical error that was being, it maybe exploited politically by your opponent, who obviously didn't want you to have this endorsement, but wasn't necessarily that the underlying technical issues weren't necessarily unfounded?
Yeah, so two things to that. You're absolutely right. Number one, there has not been a DFL endorsement for mayor since 2009. And there hasn't been an incumbent that was defeated by a challenger in the last 80 years since the party's founding. So this was really historic. Now, there were glitches in the system in which the vote tabulation resulted in a little over 100 votes not being tabulated. And that was a result of the system that was being used, and that one of the volunteers who was tasked with managing that was really getting bombarded and under a lot of stress to the point where she had a stroke, a medical emergency. She had to leave. So those are very, very valid concerns, right? And those are very valid points. The issue with that is that at every point of the way, every campaign was kept up to date on what was happening, including Frey's campaign. They went out to tabulate all the votes in which we came out on top. And the delegation was also kept up to date. They were presented or offered the opportunity to say, this is what happened, everyone. Do you want to redo the first vote? And overwhelming majority of the delegation said, we do not want to redo the first vote. We want to just go on to the second ballot. And that's why it happened. It happened because the delegation purely said, the people said, we do not want a second vote. That led to the mayor having his team send out text messages and having fellow allies say, we're going to have a walkout, we're going to break quorum, not knowing that they couldn't break quorum, right? And so in between that, they kept having resolutions and stall tactics, delay tactics coming up to the microphone, just speaking to have these delays, hoping that time would run out and that the convention site would shut everything down. When that didn't work, they walked out, and folks decided to proceed with a badge vote because we had so little time left. And with that badge vote, which is valid, it's part of the rules, we got over 60%. The park board candidates afterwards also were voted on the exact same way. They got 60% of the ones that were endorsed, and we also passed resolutions with the same process as well. But it's interesting that all of us went through the exact same process. The park board candidates, who by the way I fully support, and the resolutions. Everything else was upheld except the mayor's race. So that leads to
I
questions why
see.
that is.
I see. So, I mean, how are you feeling sort of post endorsement revocation? Do you think you sort of got the juice out of the publicity around the endorsement that will serve you in the election? Do you feel like this was a meaningful setback? What are the polls like right now for you? How are you feeling about your odds basically in winning this race?
Yeah, well, first I want to thank our local elected officials and Congresswoman Omar, who after the endorsement was taken back, they supported me in condemning this undemocratic decision. They were clear-eyed about what happened, and right now, after that, what our campaign has been seeing in Minneapolis and even beyond nationwide, since that DFL decision has been extremely strong. People have reached out to us telling us that they are simply tired of these backroom decisions that take away the voice of everyday working people. And we also understand that decisions like these fracture the party and reduce faith in the systems that we use. It undermines and devalues the hundreds of hours of work that volunteers that were not associated with any campaign, but wanted the process to run smoothly. We need to show our appreciation for them, and it does not support our collective efforts to win in the midterms and beyond. And so I know that the establishment always talks about we got to support one another, vote blue no matter who, but it seems like when it
Hmm.
comes to our side of the aisle that it doesn't really fall that way.
Yeah. So, I mean, what are the odds? Because I remember when I interviewed Zohran in, I think, February of this year, he was still polling in the single digits. Even I, again, rooting for him, saw the interview as, here's what you could know about what the left could look like, but the odds of him winning are pretty remote, right?
Yeah.
And then, of course, he took the world by storm. So I don't want to over rely on what polling might show for you, months out from the election still. But I am curious what the race is sort of looking like at this stage.
Yeah, so there hasn't been a major poll done. I think there will be one released soon. But what we're hearing from neighbors and from folks throughout the city is that they're ready for something new. They're ready for a campaign, a candidate to tackle the issues that affect everyday working people, like affordability, like a mayor that supports our public schools, like housing and dealing with our unhoused population with compassion and care. And so those are all the things that we see that the mayor has failed at. And so we really see the convention as a reflection of the kind of support that we have and that the mayor does not have. He failed to even get one-third of the delegation to support him as an incumbent that has been a two-term mayor. And so we feel really confident about our chances this November.
Help us understand what the sort of criticisms of the incumbent are. I mean, you're someone who's been in the legislature and sort of, as I understand it, in direct conflict with him as this kind of notoriously or famously, I should say, progressive legislature has been leading, frankly, among the country and advancing some of the progressive reforms that came out of the George Floyd movement, et cetera. Uh, how has Frey been orienting himself vis-a-vis the progressivism of the legislature?
So Minneapolis has been through a lot. It's been through a global pandemic. Just as you said, experienced the murder of George Floyd, in which it wasn't just a city or even a state situation, but we were nationally and globally watched. We see a crisis in public safety, and on top of that, an affordable housing emergency. And at every turn, what we have seen is that our current mayor has failed to meet the moment. He has blocked and vetoed solutions that would have supported renters, our essential workers, our unhoused neighbors, and he has been set on protecting the status quo and not everyday people. Following the murder of George Floyd, he pledged to reform public safety, and 5 years later, there is still no plan. Just he left behind a trail of vetoes and broken promises. When he first ran for mayor in 2017, he promised to end homelessness in 5 years. He said by 2022, we're going to eradicate homelessness. But right now, there are more unhoused people than when he first took office. And on top of that, no plan to fix it except just bulldozing our neighbors block by block. He promised to stand with our workers and our immigrants, but he then decided to side with Uber in our fight for rideshare protections and vetoed their rideshare bill. He vetoed the labor standards board that was meant to protect and provide value and a voice for our workers throughout the city. And we saw MPD on the scene doing crowd control when ICE was targeting our immigrant communities, and the mayor failed to update the community or city council members about what was going on. And I think that, and we know that anytime that there is a federal government coming into our city, wreaking havoc, because we know under a Trump administration it's going to continue to happen. We need clear leadership and we need better communication. So this election has not been about this election has only been about uh, uh, what people want. Who do you trust to lead in this time of crisis, whether it's public safety crisis, hostile federal government, housing crisis, what have you. We need leadership that is rooted in compassion and justice and not performative politics.
So, the incumbent has argued that, you know, in so many words, that you're the performative one. He said in this article in the Times from, I think, a couple of weeks ago. He says, I'm willing to tell our own side, even my own supporters, what they don't want to hear, Mr. Frey said. I support constructive debate as opposed to conformity. I don't just take the most leftist position by default. He added, I have not seen that in Senator Fateh. How do you respond to that claim?
Well, I'm proud to have built the broadest coalition, I would say, in this race from unions to grassroots organizers, progressives, but also members of the Blue Dog Coalition that has endorsed our campaign from the Capitol, and just everyday neighbors that have signed up to knock thousands of doors. And these ideas that I've been pushing for both as a senator and as a candidate are not extreme. We're just saying that we need to meet the basic needs of working people. In fact, some of the ideas that and some of the legislation that I'm known for, things like tuition-free college or the Uber and Lyft bill or a whole host of human services legislation, all those ideas that I got across the finish line weren't only done with Democrats, but I got bipartisan support on these radical left quote unquote ideas, right? And so we need to have a leader that speaks to the needs of the working people. And that we feel that the DFL and the Democratic establishment nationwide has lost their message when it comes to affordability and speaking to the everyday person, rather than investing in consultants and trying to find out what the right messaging is to win over voters. We need to speak directly to voters, meet them where they're at, and learn from them about how we can serve them and how to address their everyday issues that they're facing.
I want to ask you about what you make of where the sort of defund movement has gone, given that you are from Minneapolis, you are from the kind of ground zero of where this movement sprung.
Yeah.
And there was so much optimism, as I recall, in the months after the George Floyd uprising or during the George Floyd uprising or until the George Floyd uprising was basically put down, in my view, by the Biden 2020 campaign, which immediately pivoted into we have to defund the police harder. If we support Black Lives Matter, I'm going to lose this election to Trump. And basically made Democratic voters make a choice between their substantive belief in social justice and defeating
Mhm.
Donald Trump at the ballot box. Now you have candidates like Zohran Mandani, who very vociferously supported defund in tweets that are much ballyhooed by the right, now offering a sort of more moderated language. And you can interpret what he's saying as basically characterizing what defund means without saying the word defund. The argument being that the language defund is too polarizing to support. But I also am reflecting on the fact that in June of 2020, a majority of Americans approved of the burning down of the Minneapolis police station as a response to George Floyd's on-camera execution. So I do wonder what you make of the sort of pressures around defund, the pivots that candidates like Zoran have made and how they talk about defund, and whether or not you think there's an appetite in Minneapolis for substantive police reform the way that there was in 2020.
There is absolutely still an appetite for substantive reform. And what we've seen is that the murder of George Floyd was one of the most painful situations that occur not only in our state but nationwide. We witnessed the torture for several minutes and murder of a black man in South Minneapolis in the district that I'm blessed to represent. And we know that a majority of our city feels the same way. And throughout the campaign, uh, I've heard loud and clear from people that regardless where they fall on the spectrum of policing, whether they're I want to throw more money at the police and increase the police, or whether they believe in uh, police reform, or they want to defund the police, or even abolish the police, right? No matter where they fall on the spectrum, nobody's happy right now. And that's the reality. Everyone is upset with our current situation, and that speaks to the failures of our current mayor. There's a lot more we can do. We have a couple consent decrees that we got to implement, one from the state and one from the federal government that confirmed everything that communities have been saying for years around the profiling and targeting and the practices of policing. And we had a police report that showed, I'm sorry, not a police report, a city report at the end of last year that showed that nearly half of 911 calls can be diverted away from MPD, away from armed officers, in which right now we're just seeing an armed officer for every response. And that really clicks with what I've been hearing as a state senator at the Capitol. We've heard law enforcement officers come and say that we cannot respond to every single call. We're not equipped to deal with mental health crisis situations and things like that. Literally saying we need more help. And so we know two things. Number one, being pro-police accountability does not mean you're anti-public safety. People want safe their streets to be safe. They want their children to be safe. They want their communities to be safe. But we need a public safety system that responds to everyone. Right now, Minneapolis is in a unique situation in which when someone calls 911, there's a good chance that either the call doesn't go through, or when you call 911 that nobody shows up for several hours or at all. And so something has to change. And our position has been very clear in that we need to build out the alternatives to police like BCR that we have in the city, the behavioral crisis response, the mental health workers, and having law enforcement just focus on violent crime. And we don't think that there's anything radical about that. We just believe that we can have a public safety system that works for everyone if we have the political will to do so. And right now, with the leadership, we just don't have that.
I mean, it's kind of refreshing to hear, it has been difficult for me to sort of watch the backslide on this particular issue, um, including from people who I like and support and who have demonstrated a lot of integrity in, let's say, their advocacy for Gaza or other moral issues of our time. And it does feel like this particular issue is one that even progressives have made the calculation that it's not really worth defending. I want to play a clip from an interview that you did recently on CBS, which was a tough interview. This woman, you know, the her ideological bent behind these questions was not vague. It was not difficult to suss out. But I want to give people a sense of sort of what you're contending with from a media perspective. Let's play this brief clip.
I want to ask you about your support for police. It's my understanding, and as I saw it as I covered it in 2020, that you supported defunding the Minneapolis police.
In 2021, I supported the charter amendment in which would create a Department of Public Safety in which we can have a police force that is accountable under them.
But before that, didn't you support defunding the police?
Well, when we spoke about public safety in general, police officers and law enforcement, they're not the only form of public safety. What we know right now is, for example, last biennium, I worked really hard with our colleagues to bring in $19 million in public safety aid. The city's own report showed that 47% of 911 calls can be diverted away from police officers. And I think that jives really well with what we heard at the Capitol, with law enforcement officers saying, we can't respond to every call. We need help.
But you don't, you're saying you did not support defunding the police?
No, I supported providing the conversations around supporting a Department of Public Safety. And I think we can do that. And what people understand here in Minneapolis is that being pro-police accountability does not mean you're anti-public safety.
When you listen to that back and forth, well, let me say when I listen to that back and forth, I find myself wanting to be like, just say yes. Now, look, hear me out. I know that people say, Brianna, you're so radical. You're not actually running a race. You know, this isn't practical. It's not popular. You can't just say yes. But at the end of the day, anybody who doesn't like you and doesn't like defund is going to take away to me from that exchange that, of course, you support defund. You probably tweeted like Zohran, defund the police. Like, if you can't bury the truth of what you believe. So why not say, yes, I did and do support defund. We live in a city where George Floyd was murdered on camera and it sparked a national movement. We should not continue to fund a police department that has not reformed and continues to act in impunity against citizens of this city, residents of this city. And the police themselves have spoken to me and told me, as you went ahead and said, that they don't want to have to be responding to nonviolent crimes. We should fund the police to do their job, which is to follow up and resolve crimes and follow up on violent crimes, but not be paying them, funding them to be offering mental health services when they're clearly ill-equipped to do so.
Yeah, and so what wasn't also part of that conversation is that as a senator that represents the intersection in which George Floyd was murdered, is that my position has been very clear from the beginning. And at the same time, I've been clear with colleagues and fellow elected officials at every level of government that right now we're in a situation that the mayor has created a toxic environment around what public safety can be and the conversations around public safety. What do I mean by that? Regardless of where you fall on the spectrum, if you want to defund the police or abolish the police, rather than casting believing ill intent of the other person, listening to the neighbors, because this was a deeply traumatic experience for our city, for our state, for our nation. And rather than saying, okay, you have lost complete hope or trust in our police force and our public safety system. Why is that? How can we do that? How can we make this better? Instead of having those deep conversations, the default has become some members want to completely eliminate our police force. They're going to push for a situation in which our streets are no longer safe. Your kids will not be safe. Our seniors will not be safe. And I believe that those conversations around misleading the electorate was because when there is doubt and chaos, the status quo believes that voters will vote their fears and vote them back into office. And so instead of doing the right thing around public safety, I believe that they prefer us to continue to have this conversation election cycle after election cycle because they believe it's what helps them maintain their power, if that makes
Yeah,
sense.
I think, I mean, I agree with you. Obviously, they feel like being for defund is helpful to the establishment, more conservative, more corporate candidate. Obviously, the pro-cop becoming obviously candidate. I believe that is true. And look, this is my subjective belief. I'm not a pollster, I'm not a politician, I have no resources at my back to try to prove out my instinct. But my instinct is part of why that is true is that progressives, both elected progressives and people in the media sphere, all of us, I mean, not me, but many people in my position have preemptively cowered from defending defund almost immediately. I mean, the movement, for all that it put an unprecedented number of people into the street in 2020, was relatively short-lived because, and this is, again, my read of it, because of Biden's candidacy. And when Biden won the primary, the orders went out, basically, we gotta wrap this up. Because Biden signaled to the public that this is bad for my electoral chances, whether or not it was true. Remember, I just looked it up. June 3rd, 2020, over 50% of Americans agreed, not just with the Black Lives Matter movement, not just that George Floyd's death needed to be accounted for, but that it was appropriate to burn down a police station in Minneapolis. I mean, the public was woke as hell. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And instead of leaning into that reality and continuing to push for the kinds of common sense social justice reforms that were popular at the time, bail reform, the idea that you shouldn't have to sit in jail, whether or not you're in jail or out on your own reconnaissance, shouldn't be contingent on how much money you have in the bank. I mean, these are common sense sort of libertarian proposals that were gaining steam at the time. Now we're living in a media environment where the right is pushing narratives around the Ukrainian woman who was horribly, tragically slain on a train on the basis that the perpetrator was black. There's nothing to protest. The guy got arrested as he should have been and thrown in jail. There's nothing to protest, but they're able to make a movement out of that, whereas Democrats aren't able to make a movement out of the fact that civilians and innocent people are routinely killed by the cops. And the statistic about being killed by a stranger are bizarre. It's like if you stranger violence is most like a third of all stranger violence crimes are by the cops. And like another huge chunk are like by your husband. And God bless you if your husband is a cop. You know what I mean? But we're not able to make a movement out of that. And then you're in the position when you're running for office and you have to teach the whole world about what defund means in the space of 20 seconds to answer a question from a hawkish CBS reporter, because the rest of us haven't done the work in between election cycles to confidently explain why people should still be in that June 3rd, 2020 mindset of, yes, if the police are murdering civilians in the street, maybe I'm not so mad at the police station being burned down.
Yeah, and I think that uh, that fire and that appetite for meaningful change is still there. And in fact, we have a majority progressive city council that advocates for it and that's pushing for a real meaningful transformation to our public safety system. The problem with that is that we have a mayor that's not there yet and has been vetoing solutions left and right and has had an adversarial relationship with city council and with community. And his belief is that as long as we're divisive, as long as we're um, painting uh, anything other than expanding our MPD budget, increasing our police force, anything outside of that is extreme. And his belief is that that's the message that's going to sell as a Democratic mayor and candidate in the city in which George Floyd was murdered. But this is the election to prove that that's not the case, and that we've seen that clearly again in the convention in which he failed as a two-term incumbent to receive even a third of the delegation. And so this election, our public safety message has been resonating with voters, whether they're from historically black neighborhoods in North Minneapolis or some of the wealthier areas in Southwest Minneapolis. People really have an appetite for something different right now.
I mean, I hear you say that, but I would like you to sort of comment on how you think rhetorically it's sort of like from a communications perspective that sort of exchange pans out because I my talking to you and understanding where you're coming from, I don't really have any doubts about your commitment to police reform. I find myself frustrated watching that clip. And obviously I'm frustrated with the questioning first and foremost, but that is the questioning you're going to get in the right-wing country that we live in, right?
Yeah.
In the corporatist media that we have. And so strategically, I do wonder about the choice to sort of demur while she repeatedly asks you, but you do support defund, but you do support defund. And to like what is gained by sort of avoiding, I mean, the yes, yes,
Well,
and this is what it means. Yeah, go ahead.
no, even a step beyond that, we've had folks saying our campaign has been advocating for the complete abolishment of police. So it's even been a step beyond that. But it's been on our campaign to educate voters on what really is possible and what we can have. And speaking to the realities of the own city report that the mayor has not been speaking towards, that nearly half of 911 calls can be diverted away from police officers. As mentioned in the clip earlier, I worked with my colleagues to bring in $19 million in public safety aid that was meant for those alternatives to policing, like our mental health workers, for example. But for a long time, that money went untouched because the mayor and the city council couldn't agree on how to spend it. The city council wanted it for its intended use, and I believe the mayor wanted it for like police salaries or incentives to recruit
Mm.
and those kind of things. You know what I mean? And so like there's just a real disconnect from the reality of what constituents and what neighbors are facing and what the mayor is advocating for. And the honest truth that the police union does have a stronghold in our city politics, in especially within establishment Democrat politics, and that kind of undermines the movement that we're trying to create around
What does that
transforming
mean?
a public safety system.
What does that look
Well,
like? What kind of influence can the police union exert and how?
well, they've been very clear that anything other than advocating for increasing our police force or increasing our police budget is extreme. And myself, I've heard as a candidate time and time again from some residents that were unsure or unclear about the reality of what's going on, asking, why is Minneapolis, why are city council defunding the police? What's going on? Well, number one, the responsibility is on the mayor. But number two, that's flatly not true. In fact, since the murder of George Floyd, every single year we've had historic increases into our police budget for MPD. And so rather than defunding, we've been going the opposite direction, increasing funding for policing. And so there's just been a lot of misinformation that has been spread around and sticking.
Well,
But you
that's a
know,
good. Sorry, go
yeah,
ahead. Go ahead. I'm
yeah.
sorry.
No, but also that's like a good lead into some of the struggles that the Democratic Party has with messaging. Rather than honing down a message around what we can have, they've been moving away from that. And I remember when I first got elected, that one of my colleagues said that as a party, if you're explaining, then you're losing, right? If you have to say this is what public safety can look like, but A, B, C, D. Um, then folks are not going to really pay attention to that explanation. Whereas if you can have a concise message around what we really can do, such as misinformation that has been sticking, he wants to abolish, therefore police is going to be gone. That kind of sticks. Is it true? No, it's not true. But the misinformation campaign has been very strong in
Do
our
I
in our
agree that if you're explaining, you're losing? What you just said a second ago
yeah.
about how Minneapolis has funded the police more every year since 2020, and I would add, and there's no correlation between police funding and public safety, either here or on a national level. That to me is a kind of explanation that packs a big punch. We're living in a country where the federal government is in the midst of this mass defunding apparatus with the goal being quote unquote like public waste. There's the entire right wing is sort of invested in this idea that the government is spending money unnecessarily on things that don't work. The police don't work. And not only do the police not work, they're being weaponized oftentimes in contravention of the law and the Constitution to round up and deport people against the law, right? So to me, if Democrats can't land a message that says they want to fund everything that, they want to cut funding to the things that work and fund the things that don't, including the police that have not been fulfilling their role to uphold public safety, to me, that's not explaining. That's going on an offensive argument that and in a way that kind of co-ops some of their purported values of cutting waste. I'm like old enough to remember during the first Trump administration when you had this like unholy alliance between like Van Jones, Donald Trump, and Kim Kardashian in pursuit of decarceration, where the argument was it's expensive to keep people locked up. Let's get some of these grandmothers out of jail who are in there for drug mule charges or what have you, right? Like that wasn't that many years ago. So to me, it's not explaining. It's telling the truth about the fact that the police don't work. But I'm never hearing people say the police they don't work. It doesn't work. The funding isn't making you safer.
And to expand on that truth, you're right. And even for some of our more moderate conservative members in our city, constituents in our city, what I've been telling them is that even outside of the police budget, they've been bankrupting our city. What do I mean by that? We had one officer with $500,000 in overtime pay. We think that's ridiculous. They're bankrupting our city with the overtime pay that they're receiving, and also the tens of millions of dollars in police settlements whenever there's misconduct or hurting and harming our residents. So
this is what I want to hear. When one of those CBS broads gets in your face the next time, I would love to hear you say, she's like, do you support to fund the police? Ask her, do you think that we should be funding a police officer to the tune of $500,000 of your taxpayer money to sit and not do any kind of work and not do any kind of job because he violated the law? Because he can't be fired because, that ask the public, ask her and the public by extension, if that's what they want to be funding. Make it so clear what it is they're funding and how it has no relationship to public safety. That would be my preference.
No, and I appreciate that because number one, it is bankrupting our city. Number two, it takes away from the services that could go to working families, things like providing clean air and clean water, things like making sure that we're supporting local projects that are reversing decades and generations of environmental racism within our neighborhoods, especially our BIPOC neighborhoods. And so whenever we're throwing more money at officers that want overtime pay or paying for things like police settlements, it's our communities that are directly impacted as a result of that.
Let me ask you how Gaza, the genocide there, has been playing out in your race. Obviously, Zohran Mandani's refusal to back away from the slogan, globalize the Intifada, a slogan that for some reason Al Sharpton and nobody else who is so concerned with it can actually pronounce, but never mind. His commitment to that galvanized a lot of folks who saw in him a great deal of integrity for not throwing a movement under the bus that is so important to so many of us and has obviously historically been important to him. Now, more recent news, again, this aforementioned Al Sharpton interview has him softening his language and prioritizing, one might argue, the sensitivities of various Jewish New Yorkers that he says he has spoken to and whose concerns about that phrase he takes to heart.
Through the years, said and been involved in things that I've later said was misunderstood, and some things that I regretted. Mrs. Coretta Scott King told me, you got to watch language, got to watch what you say. Now, let's talk about anti-Semitism. New York City is the home of the largest Jewish population outside of Israel. The mayor must build a relationship, whoever the mayor becomes, trust in all communities of the city. The term globalize the Intifada has become a flashpoint for Jewish New Yorkers who say they're concerned about how your views on the Israeli-Gaza conflict will influence how you govern the city. You said on Meet the Press in July, that's not language you would use, but you don't want to police the speech of others. But we both know words matter. The Department of Defense means something different than the Department of War. I've experienced this throughout my own civil rights career, and I've had to correct myself to deal with what people receive may not be what I meant. And words have consequences, and sometimes we need to examine our own positions to build unity. Has your personal views on the phrase of global intifada changed since you've been running for mayor? Do you understand those that see it in a more threatening way than saying, I'm just not going to police other people's language?
Yes, they have. And you know, when we won the primary election, I said on that stage that I know that millions of New Yorkers care deeply about what happens in Israel and Palestine, and I'm one of those New Yorkers. And I commit to reaching even further to understand disagreement, to wrestle with the complexities of those differing viewpoints, because what this city deserves is a mayor that looks not only to represent the close to 600,000 New Yorkers that voted for me, but rather the 8.5 million people that call this city home. And in the meetings that I have had since that moment, I've met with Jewish elected officials, with rabbis, with community leaders, and there was one rabbi that spoke to me about how that phrase, for her, brought back memories of bus bombings in Haifa, of restaurant attacks in Jerusalem. And I knew that from what she was sharing with me that she had a fear, as she said, that that could come home to New York City. And so in having that conversation with her, I knew that the gap between the intent that I have heard some New Yorkers share with the use of that language of calling for the end of the Israeli occupation of Palestinian land was disconnected from the impact it was having in that same conversation I was having with that rabbi. And so I have said, after having that conversation, that this is language I would discourage.
Now, you've been running on the platform of affordability.
I will be litigating how we feel about that on another episode. But it seems to me quite obvious that Zohran Mandani is valued and supported in New York in large part because of his pro-Palestinian stance. Recent polls show that he is infinitely more trusted on that issue than Cuomo or Eric Adams, and that in fact polls suggest that while support for Jewish Voices for Peace is like plus 30 and all these pro-Palestinian causes is plus 30, the opposing view is very unpopular. Minneapolis is home to one of the larger Muslim populations in the country. How has this been playing out? How has Jacob Frey, the incumbent, stance on this affected the tone of the race or his appeal? What's been going on?
Well, from the very beginning, I've been very clear, and as a senator, I released a statement condemning the violence against civilians from both Hamas but also Israel. And in the same breath, I called for a permanent ceasefire. The city of Minneapolis had a resolution that passed condemning the violence against innocent Palestinians, calling for a permanent ceasefire, saying that we should not be funding Israel and their bombardment of innocent civilians. And we know that what's happening in Gaza is not a conflict or it's not complicated. It's a flat-out genocide that's being carried out. The killing, starving, displacement of millions of people, including children. And so we need to condemn that kind of violence. We need to stand firm in support of international law and human dignity. But here in Minneapolis, I think the people have already spoken clearly at the ballot box, in the streets, that they categorically reject genocide. And as mayor, I'll represent that majority because our values, we know, don't stop at our city limits. It's more of a nationwide sentiment, as you stated.
So you're a DSA candidate, and I'm curious about what you feel the relationship between you as a DSA member and basically what accountability do you see to this sort of ideology advanced by the organization. For example, there was frustration in the past over certain other DSA candidates like AOC and Jamal Bowman taking certain votes, Iron Dome votes, pro-Israel votes that were antithetical to their own stated values, frankly, and the values of the organization. There was chatter about expelling Jamal Bowman at one point from the DSA over not just votes, but I think also a trip to Israel that he had taken and a meeting with the Israeli prime minister. And there has been, I think, a lot of hand-wringing about, do we want to just get these DSA candidates elected if they're not accountable to their organization? What does it mean for them to be DSA candidates? Is it just a branding exercise that makes the DSA and the left feel good about having accomplished something? Or are they going to be accountable to us the way that ostensibly Democrats are supposed to be accountable to unions, or politicians generally are supposed to be accountable to voters, or as you see, so many Democrats and Republicans alike accountable to their AIPAC handlers. What do you see as the sort of obligations there?
Well, when I speak to Minneapolis residents, what I've been telling them is that when you hear DSA, don't think of an organization. Try to think of the values. Renters deserve affordable homes that they can stay in. Workers deserve a livable wage. Immigrants deserve protection, especially under a hostile federal government. Unhoused people deserve dignity. So we don't think that there's anything radical about that. We've been asking what is extreme about all of our residents having what they need. The real extremism that we see is a system that puts millionaires and billionaires and the well-connected first, while everyday ordinary Americans struggle to pay for rent, put food on the table, to provide for their families. And so that's the message that I've been speaking to residents that have been having, whether they're pro DSA or having reservations about DSA. I think when you look past the DSA organization, most folks agree on what we need to get accomplished as a city to make sure that we're benefiting everyone and not just the wealthy few.
Well, what happens when a candidate sort of steps out, or a politician who's been elected steps outside of what the DSA values sort of are? So, I mean,
Mhm.
one example is when AOC took to the DNC stage last fall and said Kamala Harris was tirelessly fighting for a ceasefire. I mean, we know that was categorically untrue because of contemporary and subsequent reporting. Today, as we talk, there's been a news drop. A portion of Kamala Harris's new book, 100 Days, 107 Days, or what have you, has been dropped in the Atlantic. And she basically complains that the Joe Biden administration threw her under the bus, that it was actively putting out negative stories for her, that she was getting accolades for having a softer position on Gaza, and the Biden administration was upset with her. And she basically, here, let me just quote it a little bit. She says, worse, I often learned that the president's staff was adding fuel to negative narratives that sprang up around me. One narrative that took a stubborn hold was that I had a chaotic office and unusually high staff turnover during my first year. She writes, when polls indicated that I was getting, I'm sorry, Joe was already polling badly on the age issue, with roughly 75% of voters saying he was too old to be an effective president. Then he started taking on water for his perceived blank check to Benjamin Netanyahu in Gaza. When polls indicated that I was getting more popular, the people around him didn't like the contrast that was emerging. She goes on to say, I also called on Israel for greater access to aid. It was a speech that had been vetted and approved by the White House and the National Security Council. It went viral, and the West Wing was displeased. I was castigated for apparently delivering it too well. So her characterization of that aside, which is that she tried to speak out on Gaza and wasn't allowed by the Biden administration, and yet still chose not to break from the Biden administration. It's insane framing. But of course, in the context of all of that, AOC takes the debate stage, or the DNC stage, and says, we're tirelessly fighting. Kamala Harris is tirelessly fighting for a ceasefire. Now, is that the kind of remark that should get you no longer labeled a DSA candidate, expelled from the organization? What kind of red lines are we drawing here? And what kind of accountability exists for these kind of candidates that are supposed to represent the values if there is no accountability?
Yeah, so I'll speak locally that we're not always going to be 100% lockstep on everything. There's policy positions within DSA that folks have strong disagreements with. Even in the electoral process, there are some members that don't believe in the electoral process and lost hope in that, for example, right? So there's always going to be those
What do
differences.
you
What
mean? I
I've
mean, there's
seen,
people who just don't think that the Democratic Party and electing candidates is going to be useful for the left.
yes, exactly right, exactly right. And
Yeah, relatable.
they see the Democratic Party as like Republican light, and so
Well, how do you see it? I
well,
mean, what do you take of that criticism? Yeah.
I've seen that the Democratic Party has abandoned its values around labor and working people and is too beholden to special interests and corporations. And if we go back and speak towards the needs of working people, I think that's the winning message. It is exactly why Trump won in 2024. He ran on the affordability and people suffering in the grocery stores. Now, was he lying? Of course, 100% he was lying, but he knew that it's what connected with voters. And then that's why you saw such a swing in that same kind of support for Zohran in New York City. He ran on affordability. And so we know what the winning message is. It's just whether or not we want to conclude with that or run with that. That's number one. And number two, around DSA, what I found successful as a senator that's been endorsed by DSA multiple times is that while you're not going to be in lockstep every single time, communication is important. Your job doesn't end with formulating a policy position or even passing legislation. There has to be a before, during, and after conversation so folks are up to date and are not blindsided. And that has what made me successful and as a senator, getting some things across the finish line, even some ideas in which they believed were watered down. But my belief is that we can always take a good step or a damn good first step into advancing the cause.
And can I ask, is ranked choice voting at play in your election the way it played such a pivotal role in the New York race, in the Mamdani race?
Yes, we're running in a voting system that is ranked choice voting in this municipal election. And we are saying that we're going to rank three candidates. Make sure you rank all three and you do not rank the mayor. But on top of that, we're telling folks and giving folks a reason to vote because we know that folks don't want to vote against something, they want to vote for something. And so we've been giving them our message, our vision, and saying that we we want your number one vote. We want to earn your trust and earn your support. But there are two other candidates, Jazz Hampton and Dwayne Davis, that are running, and we need to rank each other one, two, and three, so that we can have a different direction for our city.
So there are explicit sort of voting coalitions that have been put into place the same way that Brad Lander and Zoran cross-endorsed.
Correct. In this situation, there are three of us, and there are three choices on the ballot as well.
Okay, and there's no polling. I mean, like, do you have a sense of how, likely how many votes the other two non Frey candidates are doing so that, when you add it all up, how's it looking for you?
There's been a couple polls done, both by PACs, one by a PAC that is run by Frey supporters, but there's not been any major polling around I think the ranked choice system or how things are playing out. The ones that I've seen have been around like a head-to-head situation, and I think that the mayor is trying to make it like a binary choice. You only have one-on-one, and it's fine. He can try to do that, but we're telling folks that this is a ranked choice voting situation. But I do expect soon, as time progresses, that we'll have more concrete data and more polling coming out.
Yeah, okay. So I'm looking at this 538 poll from about a week ago, and it puts Frey at 41%, you at 28%, Davis that looks like around 10%, Turner a little less than that, and Hampton maybe 5%. So yeah, like all of you together definitely do eclipse Frey. And certainly there was a time when Mamdani's polling looked much, much worse than yours, not that far out from the election. So I don't recite those polls in a despairing way, but in a hopeful way. I know you have a heart out. Let people know who are listening, especially folks I mean, most of whom are not going to be in Minneapolis, how they can help support your campaign.
Yeah, thank you so much. You could go learn more about us on our website at fatehformayor.com. You can go on there, you can sign up to volunteer. Also, we need to stay competitive in this race. We're not running only against an incumbent mayor, but he has two well-funded PACs that are supporting him that will do all the typical things you know about sending out those glossy mailers and paying for those scary TV ads, right? And so we are building a real grassroots movement. Yes, do they have the influence to take away the DFL endorsement? Yes, but they could not take away the people's endorsement. And by and large, we've seen that the people are still with us and they're really excited about this campaign. We've had a large following, but also a lot of people just energized to show up and come out and door knock. We've seen people door knock 7 days a week, phone bank, talking to their neighbors. And we really believe that it's going to reflect that in November.
All right. Thank you again, Senator, for joining us here today. Thanks to all of you for tuning into Bad Faith Podcast. You know, if you want additional Bad Faith every week, you can subscribe at patreon.com/badfaithpodcast for our premium Monday episodes. As always, take care of yourselves and remember to keep the faith. Hey YouTube, thanks for watching. Just a reminder that this is a podcast. You can catch an extra premium episode every Monday for $5 a month at patreon.com/badfaithpodcast. That's patreon.com/badfaithpodcast for $5 a month, an extra episode every week. Additionally, please do consider liking this video, subscribing to this channel. It helps us out. It helps independent media beat the algorithm. We appreciate you. And as always, keep the faith.